Hey guys, it's Lindsay from the blog Repurpose and Upcycle. Today I'm going to take you through a fun rainbow dresser makeover. I'm going to talk about Valspar cabinet and furniture paint and how I used acrylic paint on the dresser fronts to create this beautiful rainbow dresser. I want to take you back to where this dresser started. This was my husband's dresser from when he was a child. I decided to give it a makeover a few years ago. I painted it black and I put stick wood planks on the front. This is what it looked like when I was done. To be honest with you, I wasn't ever 100% excited about it. So we ended up moving out of our master bedroom and I decided to paint it for my daughter's room. The first thing I did was I applied wood filler in between the planks on the bottom two dressers. So you can see I just applied it in the center, and after I applied it in all the cracks, I went ahead and let it dry, and then I sanded the wood filler really well. Once I sanded the wood filler, I had to go back and prepare the surface. Obviously, I had a lot of dust on this dresser. So preparing the surface for paint most of the time involves degrazing, cleaning, and drying it with a lint-free cloth. It's real important to use a lint-free cloth so you don't have any dust on the surface before you start to paint. The next step for me was using primer. Now you're probably wondering why I'm using primer when this particular paint clearly says no priming and no sanding necessary. And to that I say, proceed with caution. I am a huge fan of primer for so many reasons other than just putting a color barrier between a dark color and a light color. You can see I have a full video on why primer is important. I'll attach that here and in the comments. But honestly, guys, I feel like primer creates a solid barrier between the black paint and my new paint. It's almost like a water barrier when you're putting floors down. It just ensures that you're going to have a good clean finish with your new paint and the old paint will not seep through. And by the way, I am just applying this with a synthetic brush. I'm not worried about brush strokes. I just want a good layer of primer on top of the old finish. So next I am using a 320 grit sandpaper or an extra fine grit sandpaper just to go over the surface. Now you don't have to do this, but I want an ultra smooth finish. And I want to make sure if any of the primer is thicker in some areas than others that I go ahead and sand that down just to create one uniform finish. The next step after I've sanded the entire piece is once again preparing the surface. A good degreaser is Crud Cutter. I talked about using a lint-free cloth. You can also use what they call as tack cloth. Tack cloth is great. It's like this sticky cloth that'll pull any kind of dust and debris up. Next is to use the Valspar Ultra White in a semi-gloss with the cabinet and furniture paint. You can see I've already made a little bit of a mess, but how I am applying this paint is I'm brushing it on with a synthetic brush, and then I'm going back over it with a foam roller. You're probably wondering, could I just roll it on? You could. The reason I do it this way is I find that there's less splatter than if I dipped the roller in paint and then rolled it on. So you'll see I'm working in sections. I will use my synthetic brush to apply a good bit of paint, and then I'll go over it with a foam roller. Now a foam roller is key. Don't use a nap roller. It'll give it a texture. Unless you're looking for that texture, I want a very smooth finish. A couple things about this paint. This paint is fairly thin. Now what that means is when you apply a coat, it's going to be a thin coat. Don't apply a lot of it. The best way to get a good uniform finish is to apply few thin coats. And as you can see, I'm applying a thin coat and then I'm going over it with the roller, and it might take a few coats. This, honestly, without the primer, it would take 3 good coats. With the primer, it's going to take me 2 good coats. And the other thing, in between the coats, you're going to want to let it dry at least overnight, 12 to 24 hours. It'll be dry within 4 hours, but in order for it to fully cure, you're gonna wanna wait overnight or at least 12 hours. Now for me, I'm very impatient. That's hard for me, but if you don't wait that amount of time and it doesn't fully cure, what's gonna happen is it's always gonna be tacky. You know when you paint something and it never fully dries and you wonder why? Well, more than likely, that is why. The other thing that you gotta be really careful with a thin paint is drip marks. So once you're done with one coat, you're gonna wanna go back. Make sure you wipe up all of those drip marks. I normally use my paintbrush and I just go back over it and make sure that any area that's thicker than the other, I just go back over it with either your foam roller or a paintbrush. By the way, I'm not painting the front of the dressers. I'm gonna do something really fun with that. You'll see it towards the end of the video. Okay, it's the next day and it's time for coat number 2. And I'm going to do the same thing I did the first time where I put a layer down with the paintbrush, not too much, not too heavy, and then I went over it with a foam roller. So I'm going to do this same method to the entire top and the sides and all the sides of the dresser faces. And you can see here's what it looked like after I finished the second coat. So that's the end of using my Valspar cabinet and paint. I do need to let that dry overnight before I do anything else with the surface, but next step is something fun. What I'm going to be doing is creating a rainbow dresser, and I'm going to use the dresser faces to do red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. And yes, I am using acrylic paint. I am using the colors of rainbow. I'm mixing it with white paint to dilute the color down to make it more of a pastel. And I'm going to paint each of the drawers a different color, and hopefully my daughter will be excited. She's only young once, and I know she's not going to want a rainbow dresser forever, but I thought I would have fun with it while she's still in that stage. As you can see, I've already taped the dresser where I'm going to start with the red, or the pastel red. And so I'm just using a foam brush, and I'm applying the acrylic paint over where I had previously applied the primer. And that's everything I've read online as far as painting acrylic paint on furniture is just make sure you use a good primer. So since I already have a good primer on there, I'm good to go. So you can see I put some green painter's tape, and I'm going to end up putting 2 coats of the acrylic paint on the faces of the dressers. I am going to need to go back when I'm done with this and put a sealer on the top, but I'll show you guys that in a second. You can see where I'm just using painter's tape. I'm really just eyeballing it. I tried at first to measure where the green tape went, but unfortunately I found that visually it worked better when I just eyeballed it rather than measure. You're probably wondering why I'm using acrylic paint. There's really no rhyme or reason to it other than the fact that I already had the acrylic paint on hand. Now, honestly, acrylic paint isn't generally as durable as like furniture paint or something you would use on a piece of furniture, but I'm not going to use this forever, and as long as I seal it really well, it should be fine. The rest of these clips, I'm just sharing how I continue to paint the dresser fronts. My favorite part is when I get to pull the tape off and see how crisp and clean the lines look. After I put 2 coats and let it dry, the last thing I did was I used a polyacrylic sealer, clear coat. I did a semi-gloss. It seals that acrylic paint. Don't forget about the sealer. Y'all ready to see the reveal? Here it is. I'm really pleased with how it turned out. I did use the same hardware. I just used the Rub and Buff. I share a video here about how I've used Rub and Buff in the past. I love how it turned out. My daughter is super thrilled. The acrylic paint actually worked pretty well, guys. I'm pleased with it. Just make sure to put a sealer on it. And the cabinet and furniture paint looks beautiful. It took 1 coat of primer and 2 coats of the cabinet and furniture paint. I will definitely be using this paint again. I love how smooth the finish is. It also feels super durable, so hoping it will hold up. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you've learned a few things on how to create your own rainbow dresser, and a few tips on how to use Valspar's cabinet and furniture paint. This was a fun project and I can't wait to share more. Make sure you like and subscribe.